Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good morning or good afternoon, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brutcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. As always, all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of any institution with which they might be otherwise affiliated. So this episode is actually our second attempt with our two guests today. Our first attempt had some technical issues, and this was a couple of weeks ago during a writing workshop that the Krulak Center was helping host along with Dr. Njord Wegge of Norwegian Defence University College with a focus on NATO's northern flank. And Dr. Wegge here at Marine Corps University as the Chair for Arctic Security was kind enough to make some of the workshop contributors available to us for some broadcast opportunities. So if you caught the panel discussion on Arctic security a couple of weeks ago, that was the first one. This one we actually recorded first, but like I said, some technical issues, so we're here to try it again. Although on the rare occasions that we've had to redo episodes, I've always found that we kind of get something extra that makes it worthwhile. And so there's certainly been more developments on the battlefield in Ukraine, and in terms of, and as well as sort of Russian responses, reactions we can talk about. But also we actually will get to see our guests here as well as hear them, which is a good little bonus too. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we will get into our discussion and cross our fingers, second time's a charm. So our first guest is Tom Røseth, who is an associate professor in intelligence studies at the Norwegian Defence University College, Command and Staff College. He heads the NDUC Ukraine program established in 2020. He's been employed at the Command and Staff College since 2016, and before that was a fellow at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies. He has held several positions within the Norwegian Armed Forces from 2002, dealing with Russian politics, Russian foreign policy, Arctic security, the Western Balkans, and Russian-Norwegian relations. He was deployed to missions in Kosovo and North Macedonia in 2000 and 2001 to 2002, respectively. He has a PhD on Russia-China relations from 2017 from the University of Oslo, a Master in Military Studies from the Norwegian Defence University College in 2012, and a Master in Comparative Politics, Russian Studies in 2001 from the University of Bergen. He was also the first Norwegian exchange student at the Moscow State Institute for International Relations from 1998 to 1999. Our second guest is Lieutenant Colonel Palle Ydstebø, who is Chief Section for Land Power at the Norwegian Military Academy. His military training includes the Royal Norwegian Air Force Technical School, the Norwegian Military Academy, and the Norwegian Defence Command and Staff College. He holds a Master's in History from the University in Tromsø and a PhD in War Studies from the University of Glasgow. He's also served at various posts in the Norwegian Royal Air Force, the Corps of Engineers, Army Headquarters, National Intelligence Service, and the Command and Staff College. He has also served in Afghanistan, in Germany, and with the United Nations mission in Southern Sudan. So, gentlemen, welcome back, and definitely appreciate you taking out the time out at the end of your day here to help us recapture the great discussion we had when you were both visiting in Quantico. And so with that, we'll just kind of get right into our discussions. And we'd like to start with your respective backgrounds in the study of Russia's military capabilities. Some of it kind of jumped out in your biographies, but if you could both sort of discuss how you came to those studies.
Well, I can start, and what I found usable in my background is Russia studies. I've studied the Russian language and the Russian politics and Russian foreign policy, and Russia-China relations, and that has been vital for me understanding and getting more in-depth knowledge of the war and how Russia as actor, what capabilities and capacities Russia possess. And the war showed that it was not the monstrous bear that we thought, but nonetheless, it's a capable military army that has made a lot of faults. But the background also on intelligence has been very useful when it comes to assessing Russia as an actor in Ukraine.
Yeah, my background goes back to the very beginning at the Norwegian military army, and then we are back in the Cold War, and then learning from the very bottom up the structure of Soviet armored formation, mechanized formations from squad level up to regiment and division. So that was the initial beginning of it. Later on, during my studies in history, Russia had come up, but it was especially in my time at the Staff College, starting to work with operational art and tracing that back to the Soviet developments in military theory and doctrine in the 1920s, and how that was later adapted in the West. And when I worked on my PhD, that was on the emergence of operational art in the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, the Soviet analysis of especially World War I, in how they set up and understood the operational art as a military discipline, kind of set me up. And then I've done some studies, done some articles, book chapters on Russian operations in the past 20 years, and so my background in looking on the current Russian-Ukrainian war is a long and broad perspective dating back to the Soviet Union, looking for continuities and novelties. So that's my background on that one.
Great, thank you, gentlemen, both. So, sort of before we get into the perspectives that you applying those perspectives you have to the current war going on in Ukraine, what was your both of your previous experience, if any, in sort of studying the Ukrainian military capability side before the conflict started? And Tom, I think you specifically do have some focused background in that.
Yeah, we have two research projects on the Ukraine, and we collaborate with the National Defence University of Ukraine. We've been doing that since 2020. Then the first project we initiated in 2020 was on total defense cooperation with Ukraine, and that was a sort of umbrella concept, but in specific, it was an ambition to look at the full spectrum of Russian tools towards Ukraine. That could be conventional military, land, sea, or air forces, or cyber forces or influence operations as such. So it was a research, and is a research project that looks at different aspects of the Russian tools employed towards Ukraine. And in that phase as well, I mean, it was very important for Ukraine to get the outside world to see what was happening, and especially all the cyber tools that they were subject to. So that's the one project, and the other project is called Contested Ukraine, and it looks more at non-military political Russian influence into the Donbass area, which was, as we now know, the instigation area for the war. The war started in 2014, but the invasion in February. And that project looks at Russian influence, as I said, and the contest for identity, and how Russia has tried over time to build a loyalty towards sort of Russia/Soviet identity that's been possible to develop in some of this area. So especially the occupied areas prior to the invasion that we had this year. So those two projects are what we have been looking at research-wise from our Defence University College, together with the Ukrainians.
My background is briefly related to initial studies of the war in when it broke out in 2014 and up to the Minsk agreement. I was mainly studying the Russian side, but also had to look into how the Ukraine operated in that area. And then I've briefly followed some of the reform projects that have continued in Ukraine, and had occasionally meetings with Ukrainian militaries, visiting conferences and seminars in Norway. And before this phase of the war began in February, I got more or less revisiting the understanding of the structure, armory, and other elements of the Ukrainian army as part to the Russian invasion force that was building up.
Great, thank you both. So now we'll kind of shift to the buildup and then the actual initiation of the invasion. When both in the course of the buildup, as we were watching sort of the correlation of forces develop, and then through the initial invasion of Russia into Ukraine, based on both of your studies on Russia and your interactions with Ukrainian institutions and military representatives, what were your initial expectations for both Russian and Ukrainian military performance? And then did anything surprise you about either as the war unfolded?
That's a big question, Ian, and a lot of possible answers, and there's lots of things comes to mind, but there were surprises for sure. And when we saw the military built up, well, at one side you consider the factual military built up and the possible consequences of that, and then you try to consider the intention, and it's always challenging, but in the Norwegian research community, it was a bit divided. Some thought that it would be an invasion, and some thought it would not be. I was not surprised by the invasion, but I also assessed that it was possible that the diplomatic solution could prevail, but it didn't look to prevail. So, but when it comes to the performance, I'm really surprised by how Ukraine responded to the invasion, and how they have managed to do counteroffensive as of now. And how did they manage in the initial phase? It's been fairly open. I would say that there was a lot of intelligence to support that made Ukraine capable of protecting some of its vital resources when it comes to defending itself, air defense, for example. So how Ukraine acted was with some support due to the intelligence warning made by first and foremost the US, and I was surprised by the Ukrainian defense, but I'm also, that probably Palle will talk more about, also surprised by the Russian forces and how they were ineffective in many ways when it comes to logistics, when it comes to combined arms and such issues. So lot of surprises in this war for sure.
Yeah, when I saw the build-up again in late fall and over January, February, it was a bit surprising that it was so open and overt in the sense that if the Russians were planning for war, they were forfeiting one of their most important qualities. That was the element of surprise and deception, the entire maskirovka part. So they were playing out by an open stage, and when especially the US began to publicize or publish intelligence stating what the Russians were up to and even giving dates and times, to me it sounded that they had blown their intentions, and by that I didn't think that the Russian would invade based upon that they have they had forfeited intelligence, which always had been a key to their previous successes. And the other thing was the kind of forces that was deployed. It was a number of battalion tactical groups. That is the contract part of a brigade. In principle, a combined arms system, reasonably balanced, heavily on firepower and air defense, and with a good mix of armor and mechanized infantry. But these groups were developed not for sustained combat, but for speed, surprise, and shock. So if they were going to take on a deployed Ukrainian defense system consisting of combined arms brigades, and they were definitely not the right to do it. So that was kind of surprisingly, and we couldn't. What was visible by open sources, there were no second echelon heavier units. There were not the kind of layered or echeloned offensive formations you would expect if Russia would invade a country with such a defense as Ukraine had. So that kind of led me to believe that they were actually not aiming for war, but were using these forces to gain something else. So I must say I was more astonished than surprised when I am on the morning of the 24th woke up to find that the war the invasion actually had commenced. And when it comes to performance, I was a bit surprised that the Russians began to lag behind that early, even the first day, and especially with the news coming in on the Ukrainian counterattack on the Russian air-landed forces on the Gostomel airport. Then I began to wonder what they actually were up to, and were they actually believing that they could take out the entire Ukrainian forces and political system by this kind of shock groups, of course supported by various operatives infiltrated into Kiev. So that seems to me to be a gamble with very high stakes, that there were little chance for them to succeed. But we had a discussion in me and some other army fellows, if the first wave of battalion tactical groups, if they were the advance guards for heavier formations coming on. We hadn't seen any of those being displayed during the build-up, but we kept that as an option to look for. And when what was coming up was only more battalion tactical groups from different formations, and then logistics following on, it struck us that they were actually going for more or less a coup by shock, and not what we expected to be traditional Russian deep operations with tailored mechanized forces with strong combat power. So that was kind of surprising.
Ian, if I can quickly just add on the intelligence side, on the strategic warning. I mean, the US gave well, prior to the invasion, a fairly long time, but also on 18th of February, Biden said, we know what Putin is, he has decided, he will invade. And then, I mean, the world is quite skeptical of intelligence post Iraq, post Afghanistan. The fallout there was maybe not anticipated that well, but so intelligence has really established itself with this war, with a proper warning. And how the US used intelligence in this initial phase and prior to the war, excellent. And it probably disturbed and frustrated Moscow, and Moscow still denied it would not invade, but it did. So intelligence didn't stop the strategic decision to invade, but it made at least some countries prepared, and Ukraine at least prepared for the invasion sometime in advance. So it was a success on the intel side. That's what I want to add.
Great, thank you. Yes, and I think on the U.S. side, watching these deliberate disclosures. There was a little bit, I think, of concern that this could potentially burn some resources or some intelligence sources, and what would the gain be? But to your point, I think that the gain was clear. It didn't necessarily stop Putin's decision making, but it gave time for better preparation, and it also took away any chance for Putin to sort of cloud the narrative about what was going on or not, because they just every intelligence release undercut a possible line of misinformation. So to sort of shift back to the professional seats that you sit in here, obviously you're at Norwegian Defence University College, and Norway has certainly had very long-standing security concerns with Russia itself, from its own perspective and geographic position. So from that perspective, what are some of the things that you two gentlemen have been watching most closely in terms of Russia's performance and what Norwegian security concerns would be?
Well, the war has been disturbing most of Europe. Norway is no exception of that. We are a neighboring country, and we're very sensitive to the military positioning of Russia up in the Arctic. But there's two concerns, I would say. One is the Russian posture in the Arctic, and the other one is the possible expansion of the war, including NATO countries. So the first one is that most of the forces up north have been moved, at least the land forces have been moved into the war in Ukraine, and so in that regard has made large deficits, and we will take time to build them up again. So it's not that precarious situation, but well, Russian military activity is nonetheless followed closely, and if Russia does something up north, we will certainly monitor it and pay close attention. On the possible expansion of the war, fortunately that is a low probability, and although it cannot be excluded, but Russia is in no interest to do a conventional war against NATO. We know it will lose it, but how the war now escalates, it's increased risk present, but it's still a high threshold for Russia to attack a NATO country. So I think some states in the Baltics are more nervous than Norway is, but yeah, we are a small country and have high focus on the intelligence monitoring of the Russian forces up north, for sure.
Yeah, my point, I've been following the land forces and the operations going on, especially looking for qualities of Russian combined arms, and that had not impressed much at all during this operation. And neither the initial offensives in the beginning of the invasion, nor later on, especially the next offensive, that was the so-called Battle of Donbass, where after they pulled out from the north, they reformed and stated the ambition to take control over the entire Luhansk and Donetsk counties. And the slugging match they performed from April till early mid-July was not especially impressive when it comes to performance. It was enormous amount of artillery, more or less coordinated infantry armor assaults that were not able to break the Ukrainian defenses, and Ukraine were able to mount a combination of static, mobile, and retrograde defense that, despite they themselves taking casualties, inflicted severe casualties on the Russians. So the tactical performance and even operational performance of the Russian forces have not been particularly impressive. Neither has the air-ground cooperation and the more or less entire lack of a coordinated air campaign or air operation that was expected in the very beginning never materialized either. And even in the recent weeks, we've seen multi-sorties Ukrainian air-to-ground actions, especially in Kherson areas, after they have been able to at least temporarily neutralize Russian air defenses. So when it comes to the Russian overall performance, that had been way beyond expectations and beyond the image that has been created before the war. And it's interesting to notice the discussion going on among Russian specialists. What were the causes for the extreme overrating of the Russian army before the war?
If I can add one more thing, and when we were in Quantico, it was this explosion of the Nord Stream pipe 1 and 2, and that of course had been a big incident up here in the Nordic countries, and we have had an increased national preparedness on protecting our oil and gas pipelines to the continent. So other tools than the proper military tools is also of concern to Norway, as this war could potentially escalate. Russia is quite desperate in using the few tools they have available towards Ukraine, and of course there's a risk and a fear that they can add or expand the war through means that's hard to attribute to Russia.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Nord Stream pipeline. I was scribbling that down here as you gentlemen were talking earlier, and this is one of the opportunities where re-recording lets us approach some new material. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was a new development right after you had both left. Okay. I wanted to, Tom, I kind of had a specific question for you, and this goes into, from your biography, your time as the first Norwegian exchange student at the Moscow State Institute for International Relations. And, I realized that at the time frame, 1998 to 1999, a couple decades, probably a very different political and, sort of international dynamic with Russia at the time there. But what was that experience like, at the time? And was there anything that you saw there that has sort of stayed in your mind and helped inform, your approach to studying Russia here in the near term?
Well, yes, I had an interesting time then. It was a difficult time for Russia in 98 and 99. My main impression was that, well, this was an elite university with elite, the children of the elite, the nomenclatura, as they called it at the time. And I got to know quite a few, well, international students, but also some Russian students, and especially some of the teachers that I still have contact with today, at least prior to the invasion. One thing that sort of struck me, and it was a big concern for one of the teachers, was the corruption. And that's still a big problem. She was pressured to take money for giving good grades or accepting papers that she knew that the student, him or herself, hadn't written, and or dissertations and things like that. So it was a pressure to fall in line with the established corruption. And well, a lot of time has gone since then, but what we see in the Russian army currently is exactly that, the problem with corruption, and how the stockpiling and storage of material has been suboptimal, and the equipment doesn't work, or it's gone. There are reports now that, for example, 1.5 million winter suits for the winter war is gone. It's nowhere because somebody probably put it in their own pocket, the money, and never produced or ordered the suits. I would say corruption is something that comes to my mind as something that is constant, and it was in Russia then, and it seems to be very much so present today.
Great, thank you for that. And you mentioned the winter suits that aren't there. I was having a discussion with our Russia SME, or Dr. Weber from the panel from when you gentlemen were here, and we're sort of contrasting the you have Western European, got European and America providing all kinds of cold weather clothing to Ukrainian forces. In the meantime, Russia doesn't have it, and their soldiers are wrapping their feet in 1800s foot wrappings, rather than having proper equipment because somebody sold it, for whatever reason. Okay, great. So kind of last question I have for you gentlemen, and this goes back to what you had initially, visited Quantico for, which was Arctic Writing Workshop. And if you could, so what for that project that Dr. Wegge is putting together, what are your respective contributions to that final product going to be? What are the chapters you're writing about?
Okay, my chapter is on the role of doctrine in developing NATO's capabilities in the Arctic. So it's a chapter that looks into previous experiences with modern war in the Arctic, and then especially World War II, both the the German invasion of Soviet Union 1941, and there's a particularly interesting winter battle in May, as the Germans called it, in April-May 1942, a Soviet attempt to encircle and destroy the Russian defenders. And then, of course, you had the Petsamo-Kirkenes operation, October 1944, the final operations that drove the Germans out of the Soviet Arctic and back into Norway. And very much of the Russian experiences that have been published about in books and journals, military journals, is often related to the Petsamo-Kirkenes operation, and you'll find continuities in how they have set up their forces in the north, how they train, how they equip them in order to be able to operate in the Arctic. And then I will look into how NATO and major NATO countries are developing doctrines and service regulations to prepare NATO forces for Arctic operations.
I will. My chapter will be about the role of intelligence in the northern flank of NATO, focusing on the role of Norwegian intelligence in cooperation with allied partners. So I will look at how they cooperate, what resources they cooperate on, and what kind of intelligence cooperation there has been and is currently in the Arctic, and especially Norway's role as being sort of the provider of a lot of the intelligence in the area, and that gives us a lot of responsibility in doing that in a proper way. So the need for US and, for example, UK intelligence is not that dire in the area. So alliance sharing, that is. So I will look at how states cooperate within NATO on intelligence in the Arctic.
Great, thank you very much. And we, on the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University side, we look forward to when that project is finally put together and published. And I would fully expect that Dr. Wegge will help maybe put together a third event to sort of look at all the outputs of that and see what research was generated and what conclusions you reached. Okay, so that's all the questions I have for you, gentlemen. Again, very much appreciate you taking the time at the end of your days to help us try and recapture this here. And I look forward to finally getting this one out and sharing it as well. It's definitely great to talk to both of you while you were there for the workshop a couple of weeks ago. And we hope to keep this good dialogue and collaboration with Norwegian Defence University College going. So, all right, gentlemen, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.